Thanks for tuning in to Echoes of Cheating. Give a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell for more betrayal stories. The Hamptons mansion stood as a symbol of Ethan Caldwell's relentless pursuit of success, its modern architecture and sprawling grounds radiating power and affluence. Tonight, it glowed with life. Laughter and clinking glasses filled the air as Ethan's family and closest associates celebrated his 50th birthday. He stood at the head of the dining room table, watching the scene unfold like a carefully curated tableau. Julia, his wife of 22 years, was the epitome of grace and beauty. Dressed in an emerald green gown that complemented her striking auburn hair, she moved through the room with practiced ease. Her laughter rang out as she whispered something to Ryan, Ethan's younger brother, who grinned conspiratorially in response. The sight should have been innocuous, but a shadow of unease flickered across Ethan's mind. Their bond seemed closer than it had any right to be. His children, Madison and Connor, sat at the far end of the table, their faces illuminated by the glow of their phones. Madison, 17, was the spitting image of Julia, her sharp wit often masked by a veneer of teenage disinterest. Connor, at 15, was quieter, more introspective, but tonight he seemed unusually animated as he exchanged furtive glances with Madison. A shared secret passed between them in silence, punctuated by stifled giggles. Ethan frowned. His children had always been close, but this felt different, like they were in on a joke he wasn't privy to. The birthday toast came, and Julia stood to speak. "To Ethan," she began, her voice steady and warm, "a man who never stops striving for greatness, who inspires everyone around him with his vision." Her smile lit up the room, but to Ethan it felt brittle, as though carefully rehearsed. Ryan raised his glass with a grin. "To the man who built it all. Cheers, brother." There was an edge to his voice, too sweet, too deliberate. The words lingered in Ethan's ears long after the others returned to their chatter. When the party wound down, Ethan retreated to his study. The room was his sanctuary, filled with mementos of his achievements, awards, photographs with tech giants, and a framed copy of Axion Enterprises incorporation papers. He stared at the decanter of whiskey on his desk, but didn't pour a drink. His mind replayed the evening in slow motion. Julia's glances, Ryan's toast, the secretive air of his children, the dissonance gnawed at him. Ethan prided himself on his instincts, his ability to read people, to anticipate moves before they were made. Those instincts, the same ones that had propelled him to the top of the tech industry, now screamed that something was terribly wrong. He closed his eyes, willing the unease to dissipate, but it only grew louder, a cacophony he couldn't ignore. Late that night, Ethan found himself wandering the darkened halls of the mansion. In the silence, he could hear snippets of Julia and Ryan's laughter from the kitchen. He paused, outside the door, his hand resting on the cool surface of the wood. Their voices were low, intimate, and Ethan could just make out Ryan's words. "He doesn't suspect a thing, really." Ethan's blood ran cold. He backed away, his chest tight with a suffocating mix of anger and dread. The perfect world he had built now felt like a fragile illusion, its foundations cracking beneath the weight of betrayal. Standing in the dim light of the hallway, Ethan made a decision. He wouldn't confront them. Not yet. Whatever was happening, he needed to know the full scope before he acted. He returned to his study, his mind already racing through possibilities, strategies, and countermeasures. His gut told him the stakes were higher than he could have imagined. And Ethan Caldwell's gut was never wrong. Ethan Caldwell's world began to shift the moment he decided to look beneath the surface of his picture-perfect life. The days following his birthday were filled with a growing sense of alienation. Everything appeared normal on the surface, yet each interaction felt tinged with an undercurrent of deceit. His family seemed unchanged. Julia flitted between charity events and long hours in her art gallery, Ryan continued his frequent visits to the mansion, and Madison and Connor carried on with their teenage antics. But to Ethan, the cracks were becoming impossible to ignore. One evening, Ethan walked into the kitchen to find Julia on a call. Her back was to him, her voice low and urgent. "No, it has to be next week," she was saying. "He's distracted with the board right now. It's the perfect time." Ethan cleared his throat, and Julia spun around, her expression momentarily startled before it softened into a smile. "Just organizing a fundraiser," she said, her tone airy. But Ethan noted how quickly she ended the call, her fingers tightening around the phone as though she feared he might reach for it. His brother Ryan had also taken a sudden interest in Axion Enterprises. For years, Ryan had been content to ride the coattails of Ethan's success, dabbling in minor ventures while basking in the glow of being the tech mogul's brother. But now, Ryan's questions about Axion were becoming unnervingly specific. During a casual lunch, Ryan leaned forward, his expression feigning curiosity. "What's going on with the new AI project? I heard it's supposed to revolutionize the market." Ethan shrugged, keeping his tone nonchalant. "Still in development. Why the sudden interest?" Ryan waved a dismissive hand. "Just curious. You know, people talk. Figured I should keep up." The comment was light, but Ethan could see the hunger in his brother's eyes. It wasn't curiosity, it was calculation. Ethan's children were no less unsettling. At breakfast one morning, he overheard Madison and Connor whispering about a trip into the city. When he asked what it was about, Madison gave him a practiced smile. "Just meeting some friends. Nothing major." Connor nodded along, but Ethan caught the subtle glance Madison shot her brother, a silent warning to say no more. It was a look he'd seen them share increasingly often, and it always seemed to involve discussions he wasn't meant to overhear. At work, things were no better. His senior executive mentioned in passing, "Ryan's been asking questions about the AI division. Thought it was odd, given he's never shown much interest before." Ethan nodded and changed the subject, but inside, his unease solidified into something colder and harder. The walls were closing in, and Ethan could feel the betrayal inching closer. Determined to get answers, Ethan waited until the house was empty one evening. Julia had taken the kids to a gala, leaving her laptop unattended in the kitchen. Ethan hesitated for a moment before sitting down and opening the device. He knew her password, an anniversary date she probably hadn't realized he still remembered. The laptop unlocked with a quiet chime, and within moments, Ethan was sifting through her emails. The first messages were mundane, correspondences with gallery clients, RSVPs for social events, but then he found the thread with Ryan. It started innocuously enough, discussions about family and upcoming gatherings. But as Ethan scrolled further, the tone shifted. Ryan was asking about board members, hinting at private meetings, referencing financial records Ethan had never authorized him to see. Julia's replies were equally damning. She mentioned the timing being perfect, getting the kids on board, and, most chillingly, ensuring Ethan doesn't see this coming. Ethan's chest tightened as he read on. The messages laid out plans to sideline him at Axion, leveraging board votes to force him out of the CEO role. Ryan had even suggested a partnership with a rival company, one Ethan had turned down months ago due to their questionable ethics. But what twisted the knife most deeply was the mention of his children. Madison and Connor were referenced as future stakeholders, their roles being groomed for a transition Ethan hadn't sanctioned or even known about. The betrayal was systemic, strategic. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment plan, it was something they had been orchestrating for months, if not years. Ethan felt a sick mix of fury and heartbreak. His wife, his brother, his children, they weren't just betraying him, they were dismantling everything he had built, piece by piece. In the following days, Ethan became a ghost in his own home, observing every interaction with new clarity. Julia's late nights were no longer dismissed as professional obligations. Ryan's frequent visits weren't about brotherly camaraderie. Madison and Connor's evasive behaviour now screamed of complicity. Even small things, Julia's careful deflection when asked about family plans, Connor's sudden interest in business topics, took on sinister implications. But Ethan didn't confront them. Not yet. He knew that a direct approach would only push them to cover their tracks. Instead, he began to gather evidence, piecing together their scheme with the precision of a chess master. He hired a private investigator, someone with no ties to his family or his company, to dig into Ryan's financials and Julia's communications. He also discreetly installed cameras in key areas of the house, ensuring that no conversation went unnoticed. Every evening, Ethan would retreat to his study, reviewing the day's findings with growing dread. Julia's web of deceit was deeper than he'd imagined. Ryan wasn't just after the company. He was siphoning funds from joint investments Ethan had trusted him to manage. The children weren't mere pawns. They were actively involved, their futures intertwined with the fallout of the betrayal. Ethan stared at the growing pile of evidence on his desk, his jaw set in grim determination. Whatever game they were playing, they didn't realize who they were up against. Ethan Caldwell had built his empire from nothing, navigating some of the most ruthless business landscapes in the world. If his own family wanted to turn on him, they'd better be prepared for the consequences. Ethan Caldwell sat alone in his study, the soft glow of his laptop screen illuminating his face. It was well past midnight, but sleep had become a distant luxury. Before him lay the damning emails exchanged between Julia and Ryan, their plans to oust him from Axion Enterprises, laid out in cold, calculated words. Each line was another dagger, not just into his career, but into the very fabric of his family. The betrayal was more intricate than Ethan had imagined. Ryan's sudden interest in Axion was not coincidental. Over the last few months, he had quietly positioned himself as a trusted confidant to several board members. The emails showed meetings held without Ethan's knowledge, agreements forged to cast doubt on his leadership. Ryan's rhetoric was persuasive, painting Ethan as a once brilliant mind, now blinded by hubris. Unable to adapt to the shifting tides of the tech industry, "We need someone with vision," Ryan had written to one board member. "Ethan's decisions are reckless. He's gambling with the future of Axion." Julia's involvement was just as calculated. She was more than a passive conspirator. She was an active architect of Ethan's downfall. Her charm had always been one of her greatest assets, and now she was weaponizing it against him. Her messages revealed secret meetings with Axion's competitors, particularly with the CEO of Envisiatech, a company Ethan had long viewed as a second-rate knockoff of Axion's innovations. Julia's role was clear. She was brokering a partnership between Ryan and Envisiatech, offering insider knowledge in exchange for a lucrative payout and a promise of influence once Ryan assumed control. But the most gut-wrenching revelation came in the form of his children's involvement. Madison and Connor were being groomed to step into leadership roles at Axion, not under Ethan's guidance, but as pawns in Ryan and Julia's endgame. Ryan's emails detailed how he was mentoring Madison, discussing her eventual role on the board. Connor's name appeared less frequently, but one email from Julia chilled Ethan to the core. "Connor's loyalty is fragile, but he'll fall in line when he sees the benefits." Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. His mind was a battlefield of emotions: rage, sorrow, disbelief. But above all, there was a cold, determined clarity. His family wasn't just betraying him, they were erasing him. If their plan succeeded, Ethan Caldwell would be a ghost in the very empire he had built from the ground up. The next day, Ethan's routine remained unchanged, outwardly at least. He dressed in his usual tailored suit and drove to Axion's headquarters, but inside he was a man on a mission. He spent the day not in meetings, but quietly consolidating power. He called in favors from long-standing allies within the company, executives who owed their careers to his vision. He subtly redirected key projects, ensuring that control remained firmly in his grasp. By the end of the day, he had fortified his position without anyone suspecting a thing. That evening, Ethan returned home to an eerily normal scene. Julia was in the living room, sipping wine and scrolling through her phone. Madison and Connor were in the den, playing video games. Ryan's car was in the driveway, his laughter echoing from the kitchen. The sight of them all, so casual in the deception, made Ethan's stomach turn. He waited until the house was quiet before slipping into Julia's office. Her laptop wasn't there. She had started keeping it with her at all times, but Ethan found a small notebook tucked into her desk drawer. Flipping through it, he found a list of names and dates. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than a social calendar, but as Ethan cross-referenced the dates with company records, he realized they corresponded to critical moments in Axion's history. Product launches, board meetings, regulatory filings. Each name on the list was someone with influence over those events. Among the names was David Carlisle, a senior engineer Ethan had mentored. David was one of Axion's brightest minds, responsible for some of their most groundbreaking AI advancements. Ethan's chest tightened as he realized David had been attending secret meetings with Ryan and Julia. A quick search through Julia's email drafts revealed a conversation with Carlisle about a transition plan for Axion's future. David was promised a higher position in exchange for his loyalty. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. Carlisle had been one of the few people Ethan trusted implicitly. Now, he was just another piece in Julia and Ryan's chess game. The following week, Ethan began laying his own traps. He reached out to Axion's legal counsel, a sharp-witted attorney named Caroline Wu, and subtly hinted at concerns about internal security. Hypothetically, he said during a lunch meeting, what would happen if a competitor got their hands on proprietary data? Could we track it? Caroline raised an eyebrow, but nodded. If there's a trail, we'll find it. Ethan then ordered a discreet audit of Axion's internal communications. Within days, Caroline's team uncovered irregularities. Encrypted messages sent from Ryan's account, data packets flagged as suspicious by the IT department. Ethan feigned surprise, instructing Caroline to launch a deeper investigation. I trust you'll handle this quietly, he said. She nodded, her expression serious. Of course. Meanwhile, Ethan began monitoring his family at home. The security cameras he had installed captured fragments of conversations between Julia and Ryan. One night, as they sat in the kitchen with glasses of wine, Ryan said, "He's too wrapped up in his own ego to see what's happening." Julia laughed softly. He always did underestimate us. Their confidence was infuriating, but it also gave Ethan an advantage. They weren't being careful anymore. They thought they had already won. Ethan's turning point came when he intercepted a call between Julia and a board member. Using a device he'd purchased specifically for this purpose, he listened as Julia said, "The vote's scheduled for the 15th. Once Ryan's in, Ethan won't have a leg to stand on." The board member replied, "And you're sure the kids are ready for this?" Julia's voice softened. "They'll do whatever we need them to. They know this is for their future." Ethan's hands tightened around the device. He knew what he had to do. The next day, Ethan confronted David Carlisle. The meeting was cordial on the surface, but Ethan's tone carried an undercurrent of steel. Finally lifted from my desk last week somehow. The next day, Ethan confronted David Carlisle. "I know about your conversations with Ryan," he said, scaring me into confessions. "I want to prove that I have no more control over you than the gods above." Spare me a criminal. Carlisle broke. Over the next hour, he confessed to everything: the meetings, the promises, the planned sabotage of Axion's upcoming AI project. Ethan recorded the conversation and made Carlisle sign a statement admitting his actions. Armed with this new leverage, Ethan began dismantling Julia and Ryan's scheme piece by piece. He shared the evidence with Caroline Wu, instructing her to bring it to the board. He also started reaching out to competitors, subtly undermining Invisiatech's credibility in the industry. By the time the 15th rolled around, Ethan was ready. As he walked into the boardroom, he felt a calm resolve settle over him. His enemies thought they had him cornered, but Ethan Caldwell had been playing a longer game all along. Ethan Caldwell had always been a master strategist, but this time the stakes weren't just financial, they were deeply personal. Betrayal wasn't new to him. The business world was rife with sharks, and he'd faced his share of backstabbing partners. But when the betrayal came from within his family, it struck at the core of his existence. His wife, his brother, and even his children were plotting against him, and now every move Ethan made carried a weight he had never felt before. Over the weeks following his discovery of their plans, Ethan laid the groundwork for his counterstrike. He knew that confrontation was premature. Instead, he focused on disarming his enemies, quietly, methodically, while maintaining the facade of normalcy. His days became a delicate balancing act. At Axion, he strengthened his position among loyalists, while at home, he played the role of oblivious husband and doting father. Strategic alliances and asset protection. The first step in Ethan's plan was securing his financial position. Through his private legal team, he moved critical personal and business assets into offshore accounts that couldn't be touched without his direct authorization. He disguised these transactions as routine restructuring, ensuring no red flags were raised. At Axion, Ethan held a series of private meetings with his closest allies, senior executives who had been with the company since its inception. He shared carefully selected pieces of evidence, not enough to reveal the full scope of the conspiracy, but enough to sow doubt about Ryan's intentions. "Ryan's ambition is admirable," Ethan said during one such meeting, "but I'm concerned he's overstepping. Keep an eye on him for me." Meanwhile, Ethan enlisted Axion's security team to enhance their monitoring systems, citing a rise in corporate espionage. He didn't mention that the primary targets were his own brother and wife. The IT team flagged several suspicious emails and encrypted data transfers, which Ethan filed away for future use. Each discovery bolstered his arsenal. Surveillance at home. At home, Ethan continued to play the part of a loving husband and father. Julia was none the wiser to the cameras he had installed throughout the house. The recordings captured everything: Julia and Ryan's whispered conversations in the kitchen, the late-night phone calls, and even Madison and Connor's private discussions. One evening, Ethan sat in his study, reviewing the footage from the night before. Julia and Ryan were seated at the kitchen island, sipping wine. "Oh, he's so predictable," Ryan said, his tone dripping with arrogance. "You just need to keep stroking his ego. Let him think he's still in control." Julia laughed softly. "It's almost sad. He's no idea what's coming." Ethan paused the video, his jaw tightening. He had underestimated the depth of their contempt, but it only solidized his resolve. They believed they were untouchable. A mistake he would soon exploit. A false trail. Knowing his family and Ryan would scrutinize his every move, Ethan created a decoy. He began feigning interest in a side project, a small AI initiative he framed as a passion project. It was a ruse, designed to distract them from his true intentions. Ethan fed them just enough information to make them believe he was pouring his energy into the project, leaving Axion vulnerable. The false trail worked better than he expected. Julia and Ryan's conversations shifted toward how they could capitalize on Ethan's supposed distraction. Ryan even suggested accelerating their timeline. "If he's busy chasing side projects," Ryan said in an email, "we can take control sooner." Ethan smiled grimly. They were walking straight into his trap. The turning point. The turning point came during a dinner party Ethan hosted for Axion's board members. It was an annual tradition, and this year Ethan spared no expense. The sprawling garden was lit with soft golden lights, and the catered meal was a masterpiece of culinary art. Julia played the perfect hostess, charming the board members with her wit and grace. Ryan, too, was in his element, laughing and joking as though he didn't have a care in the world. Ethan moved through the crowd with practiced ease, his demeanor calm and affable. But beneath the surface, he was carefully observing. He noted which board members gravitated toward Ryan, who lingered in private conversations with Julia, and who seemed wary of the pair. These observations would prove crucial in the days to come. At the dinner's conclusion, Ethan stood to deliver a toast. Raising his glass, he said, "To Axion Enterprises, the combination of hard work, innovation, and the trust we've built together. Here's to an even brighter future." The room erupted in applause, but as Ethan lowered his glass, his eyes locked briefly with Ryan's. The unspoken challenge was clear. The evidence begins to surface. The next morning, Ethan initiated the first phase of his offensive. He provided the board with a confidential report detailing irregularities in Ryan's financial activities. The report, compiled by Axion's security team, highlighted offshore accounts linked to Ryan, transactions that coincided suspiciously with Axion's major deals. Ethan presented the findings to Caroline Wu, Axion's legal counsel, in a private meeting. "We need to handle this delicately," Ethan said. "If Ryan's actions compromise the company, the fallout could be catastrophic." Caroline's sharp eyes scanned the report. "This is damning," she said. "Do you want me to bring this to the board?" "Not yet," Ethan replied. "I need to gather more, but if the situation escalates, I want to ensure we're prepared." Ethan also began planting seeds of doubt among Ryan's allies. During one meeting, he casually remarked, "I've heard whispers about Ryan's financial dealings. Nothing concrete, of course, but it's enough to make me wonder." The comment was enough to sow uncertainty, making Ryan's allies second-guess their loyalty, unraveling Julia's role. While Ethan was dismantling Ryan's position at Axion, he also turned his attention to Julia. Through his private investigator, he uncovered her secret meetings with Invisiatech executives. The investigator even obtained photos of Julia entering and exiting luxury hotels with Axion's rivals. Ethan shared this evidence with Caroline. "She's actively colluding with competitors," he said. "This isn't just personal, it's corporate sabotage." Caroline's expression hardened. "We'll need to act quickly. If this gets out, it could damage Axion's reputation." "Let's keep this between us for now," Ethan said. "I want to handle this my way." A calculated risk? Ethan's final move was risky, but necessary. He arranged for Axion's board to conduct an emergency meeting. The agenda was ostensibly about the company's AI initiative, but Ethan had other plans. As the meeting commenced, he unveiled a presentation detailing the full scope of Ryan and Julia's betrayal, the financial irregularities, the collusion with competitors, and even surveillance footage of their private discussions. The boardroom fell silent as the evidence played out on the screen. Ryan's face turned pale, his usual bravado replaced with visible panic. Julia, seated beside him, struggled to maintain her composure, but the damage was done. "I trusted you both," Ethan said, his voice calm but cold. "Not just as colleagues, but as family. You've betrayed that trust in ways I never thought possible. The board will decide your fate, but know this, you will never set foot in Axion again." As security escorted Ryan and Julia from the building, Ethan felt a wave of both triumph and sadness. His empire was safe, for now, but the price of that safety was the loss of the family he once cherished. The Axion Enterprises Gala was always a grand affair, but this year the atmosphere buzzed with a peculiar energy. Ethan Caldwell stood near the entrance, greeting guests with the calm confidence of a man who knew he was in control. The ballroom shimmered with golden light, crystal chandeliers casting prisms over the impeccably dressed attendees. Waiters glided through the crowd, offering glasses of champagne as murmurs of Axion's future innovations filled the air. Julia arrived late, as always, making a dramatic entrance in a black velvet gown that hugged her figure. She floated into the room with practiced ease, her radiant smile masking the turmoil Ethan knew lay beneath. Ryan was already mingling, his charm dialed up to its usual maximum, laughing too loudly at jokes and clapping shoulders with the board members he had been courting for months. Madison and Connor lingered at the edges of the crowd, their expressions betraying the faint nervousness of participants in a scheme that was now spiraling beyond their control. Ethan moved through the room with purpose, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries, but his focus remained on the evening's crescendo. He had orchestrated every detail of this night, ensuring that when the truth came out, there would be no room for denial. No escape routes for the conspirators. The unveiling. Halfway through the evening, Ethan took the stage. The hum of conversation died down as all eyes turned to him. He stood tall, the consummate leader, his voice steady as he began to speak. "Thank you all for joining us tonight," he began. "Axion has always been about pushing boundaries, about creating a future where technology serves humanity in ways we never thought possible." A round of applause followed, but Ethan raised his hand to silence it. "Tonight, I want to share something different, a story of trust and betrayal, of ambition and consequences." The room stilled, the atmosphere shifting from celebratory to tense. Julia froze mid-sip of her champagne, her eyes narrowing. Ryan's confident smile faltered as he shifted uncomfortably. Ethan gestured toward the large screens behind him. "Over the past few months, I've discovered that not everyone in this room has been working toward Axion's shared vision. Some have sought to undermine it, to twist it for their personal gain." The screens flickered to life, displaying snippets of emails, financial records, and surveillance footage. Ethan's voice sharpened. "Ryan Caldwell, my brother, has been embezzling company funds, conspiring with our competitors, and jeopardizing Axion's future." Gasps erupted throughout the room. Ryan shot to his feet, his face flushed with anger. "This is absurd," he shouted. "You're making baseless accusations." Ethan remained composed. "Basis? Let's let the evidence speak for itself." The footage played, showing Ryan meeting with executives from Invisiatech, outlining plans to undercut Axion's projects. Ethan watched as the color drained from Ryan's face. The final clip sealed it. A conversation between Ryan and Julia in the Caldwell mansion, discussing the best way to push Ethan out of the company. Julia's fall. The audience's attention shifted to Julia, whose poise was unraveling. Ethan addressed her directly. "Julia Caldwell, my wife of 22 years, not only betrayed our marriage, but colluded with Ryan to sabotage Axion. You sold our secrets, our family's legacy, for a temporary alliance with people who only see you as a pawn." Julia's response was icy. "Don't pretend you're the victim here, Ethan," she snapped. "You've spent your life obsessed with Axion, leaving me to play second fiddle. Don't act surprised that someone else saw my value." Ethan tilted his head, his voice cutting. "Your value? Is that what Ryan's empty promises were worth? Betraying our family, manipulating our children. For what? A hollow partnership?" He turned to the audience. "This isn't just about personal betrayal. Julia and Ryan's actions have put Axion at risk, but I've ensured that their plans will fail." The children's role. The most difficult part of the evening came next. Ethan's gaze landed on Madison and Connor, who were huddled together near the back of the room. His voice softened, but his words carried weight. "Madison, Connor, you're young, and I want to believe you were led astray. But loyalty is earned, not inherited. You chose sides, and those choices have consequences." Madison's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. Connor looked down at his shoes, his bravado gone. Julia moved to step forward, but Ethan raised his hand. "They'll learn from this, as we all will." The board's verdict. Ethan turned to the board members who sat in stunned silence. "This is the truth of what's been happening within Axion. But as your CEO, I've taken steps to protect this company. The assets Ryan tried to funnel to Invisiatech have been frozen. The board votes Julia influenced have been voided. And as of tonight, Ryan and Julia are no longer associated with Axion Enterprises." The board members exchanged glances, their faces a mix of shock and relief. Caroline Wu, the company's legal counsel, stood and addressed the room. The evidence is undeniable. The board will convene immediately to formalise the removal of Ryan Caldwell from all roles within the company. The aftermath. As security escorted Ryan and Julia out of the gala, Ethan followed them to the door. Julia turned to face him, her expression defiant, even in defeat. "You've destroyed your family tonight, Ethan." Ethan's gaze was steady. "No, Julia, you did that when you chose ambition over loyalty. I've simply ensured justice was served." Ryan muttered under his breath, but Ethan ignored him. He watched as they disappeared into the night, the weight of their betrayal leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. A new beginning. Ethan returned to the ballroom, the murmurs of the crowd fading as he re-entered. He raised his glass once more. "To Axion Enterprises, and to the resilience of truth, may this be a reminder that integrity will always prevail." The room erupted in applause, though Ethan hardly heard it. His thoughts were elsewhere, on the family he had lost, and the future he now had to rebuild. Later that night, Ethan sat alone in his study, a glass of whiskey in hand. The mansion was eerily quiet, the echoes of the evening still reverberating in his mind. He stared at the stack of documents on his desk, the evidence, the plans, the remnants of a life he thought he knew. For the first time in weeks, Ethan allowed himself a moment of reflection. Justice had been served, but the cost was steep. His family was fractured, his trust shattered. And yet, as he looked out at the first light of dawn breaking over the Hamptons, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where he would reclaim not just his company, but his identity. Ethan Caldwell was a survivor, and nothing, not even betrayal, could keep him down for long.